Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'll wait for a green light from Tom to make sure we're live, and then we'll get into today's show. Now, several of you wanted me to look at this bizarre phenomenon happening where people are falling out of windows. And the latest was this model here. She was actually Miss USA. And she apparently jumped to her death just a few days ago. The question we're here to ask is, did she really? Now, our rabbit hole journey on this begins all the way back in the 1950s with this man, Frank Olson. And he became a human subject of the MK Ultra program in the 1950s. And this was after he was covertly dosed by his colleague and director of the MK Ultra program. His name was Cheslie Gottlieb. Now, before we get into exactly what Gottlieb did to Olson, you have probably heard me mention the name Gottlieb before. Remember Thump's FDA appointment? Remember we used to call him Scott Got Milk Gottlieb? You know, the one that was pressuring the states to get rid of their religious exemptions for stickers, saying that if they wouldn't do it, then the federal government would? Yes, that Scott Gottlieb. Well, based on my research today, and I'm going to present all the evidence, Scott may be the grandson of MK Ultra Cheslie Gottlieb. Now, let me show you what I found here and how we came to this conclusion, because this is simply unbelievable. Let me go back here. So, this is Cheslie Gottlieb. This is the guy who covertly dosed Olson's drinks with LSD and did that to several other men at a retreat. And then the rest was history. There's actually been movies made on this particular story. So, Scott may be the grandson of this MK Ultra founder. Now, let's track this down here because, according to this, Cheslie had two sons. Cheslie Gottlieb, Peter and Stephen. And this Peter right here, Peter Gottlieb, let's scroll up here so you guys can see this. This is Dr. Peter Gottlieb. I got to be careful here because I don't want to mess this up. This Peter was born around the same time that Cheslie's son Peter was born, which was like the early 1930s. So it has to be the same Peter. Now, this guy was in the JPL program. He was a scientist, all the hallmarks of the elite. But the difference is that this Peter here had a brother named Stanley, not Stephen. Because remember, Cheslie had two sons, Peter and Stephen. So this guy had a brother named Stanley, not Stephen. So you have to ask yourself, is Stephen really Stanley? And if he was, then this could be the same Stanley who was Scott Gottlieb's father. Here's Scott Gottlieb here. Got Milk Gottlieb, appointed by Thump, threatening states to get rid of their religious exemptions, which is the only protection some of us have. He is no longer the FDA appointed head. I guess he was replaced. But his father was Stanley Gottlieb. So, you have to ask yourself, is this the same one? Now, both of these Gottliebs are from New Jersey. Scott is from New Jersey, and Cheslie is from New Jersey, or New York, but he spent a lot of time in New Jersey. So, the question becomes, if Scott's pedigree is from this MK Ultra program, why did Thump appoint him to head up the FDA? What is the connection between the FDA and the MK Ultra program, if there is any. And now my wheels began to turn. This is when I really got into this decode because, again, this was a request by you guys for me to look into this. So basically what happened is Frank Olson was covertly drugged by Gottlieb. And 9 days later, he fell out of a 10th story or the 10th floor window of a hotel, Pennsylvania in Manhattan. This was on November 28th, 1953. Now, there was a lot of controversy behind Olson's death. I'm going to scroll down so you guys can kind of see the story as I'm talking about this. There was a lot of controversy behind Olson's death, and many believed he was the human subject of MK Ultra human testing program. And so now we're going to get into some of the details of Olson's life so we can hopefully glean some truth out of all this. So Olson was a bioweapons engineer, and his career started when he got a phone call from people associated with Sidney Gottlieb, and they asked him to join this secret bioweapons program. Here's the story right here. Sidney Gottlieb, director of the MK Ultra program, and how Olson was recruited into the secret bioweapons program. Now, the guy who hired Olson worked with a guy named Merck. Let me scroll down to that part right here so you can see this. Baldwin was the one who hired Olson, and he worked with this guy named Merck. Now, you've heard this name before because this is actually the Merck who founded the Merck Pharmaceuticals. Now, this should be giving you chills because what is the founder of Merck doing? Working on bioweapons programs, secret military bioweapons programs. Now, here's where I got chills because I began to realize that we were onto something here. This rabbit hole goes very, very deep. Now, both Olson and his boss worked with paperclip scientists from the germs of many, we have to call the country, because you can't even say that name on YouTube anymore. So they worked on this Operation Paperclip and weaponizing the aerosol form of some of these bioweapons. Olson was the scientist also behind Operation Sea Spray. Now, we had covered Operation Sea Spray at length on this channel. Remember, this was all about the Navy, and they sprayed a known pathogen on the people of San Francisco. This was as recently, I think, as the 1970s, maybe. And this resulted in several deaths. And remember, in following down that rabbit trail, I actually contacted the son of one of the guys who died in that experiment. And he replied back to me through email that he was satisfied with whatever the settlement he got, and he didn't want to look any further into this. Now, I'm guessing he probably signed some non-disclosure agreement because that's how they silence everybody. They pay you a bunch of money, the person sells out, receives the money, and they sign an agreement that they can't talk about this anymore. And that's how things get swept under the rug. Well, who prints the money? Well, we know who prints the money. And so, if they have deep pockets, they can silence anyone. Now, Olson did similar studies at Long Island with agents that were so deadly that they couldn't even be brought onto the U.S. mainland. Olson also spent a lot of time at Fort Detrick developing chemical weapons, and at a certain point, he went to work for the CIA on Project Artichoke, an interrogation program. Now, while at Detrick, he mutilated monkeys and made lots of animals suffer. And he was also witness to many drug-induced interrogations. Now, Here's where things got messy during the Korean War, when captured POWs admitted that the U.S. had used bioweapons against Korea. Now, Olson was in charge of the debriefing of these POWs once they were traded for release, and the U.S. basically viewed these POWs as a security risk. And so who knows what happens, who knows what happened to these POWs once they returned as they were debriefed. I'm thinking they were probably put through some of these programs to see exactly what they said and what they knew. So, to make a long story short, Olson came to believe that the U.S. had in fact used biological weapons against Korea during the Korean War. And so what they're pretty much saying is that Olson knew too much. He witnessed all these atrocities, including the deaths of human subjects under interrogation, the poisoning of a French village that is documented, and they poisoned them with LSD. A bunch of people died, and Olson was witness to all this. And also the alleged knowledge of a bioweapon used on Korea. So this guy became a liability, didn't he? And that's when the smear campaign on his life began. He was diagnosed by a psychiatrist, and it was recommended that all his clearances be removed. So let's scroll down here and get caught up so what I'm talking about, you guys can see on the screen. Make this a little bit smaller. Now, so he was then invited, because they were ready to take this guy out. Let's go back up to this part here. He was then invited to this retreat at Deep Creek Lake. Now, apparently this was some kind of normal annual retreat for these elite people. And at that retreat, Olson and several others were drugged with LSD. At that point, he tried to resign, but then shortly after that, he fell from a building, supposedly. Now, the creepy thing is he was laying on the sidewalk, about to die, but he was still alive for a few moments, and the witnesses say that he tried to mumble something, but then soon passed away. So this is the story behind Olson. Now, the witnesses to this, the hotel manager, for instance, said that when they went up to the room, that the window was closed and the shades were drawn. And he couldn't figure out, and had never seen in his entire life, someone be able to jump out a window with the shades drawn and the windows closed. So, what was Olson doing at this hotel? Well, shortly after this retreat in which he was drugged, he was rooming with a guy named Lashbrook. Now, Lashbrook was Gottlieb's #1 right-hand man. And Lashbrook was also the guy who drugged the drinks at the retreat. So he ended up rooming with Olson at the hotel. And here's another angle to the story. Olson and Lashbrook, once they investigated all this, they had basically, before all this happened, they had made a pit stop off to this guy, John Mulholland, this magician. Now, they found things in his wallet that suggested that they had went to go visit this guy, John Mulholland, this magician. Now, what makes John Mulholland so special? Well, he was turned into a CIA asset. And the creepy thing about Mulholland was he was friends with Houdini. And David Copperfield now owns his spell book for soldiers. Now, I believe David Copperfield was among the list of people in Eggstein's Black Book, if I'm not mistaken. Him along with that other guy. There was another newer magician that was also in the book. And so there's some kind of fascination with these magicians and these people. So now, what kind of work was Mulholland doing for the CIA? Well, what he was doing was basically putting together a book that could fool people, because the CIA was interested in how to deceive people. They called it deception and misdirection, and he wrote a manual on it. And that's what they wanted out of this guy: trickery and deception. So now the plot thickens. Now, the police that were investigating the case on Frank Olson's death, they had compared it to a similar scene that had happened just a few years earlier in 1948, in which a high-level government official that was suspected of espionage, named Lawrence Duggan, also fell out of a window. Now, family was really upset about this, Olson's family, and they filed a wrongful death case against the government. They were actually paid out $4 million in today's dollars. But over the years, they've kept up the fight to uncover the truth about what happened to Olson. And there have been autopsies, exhumed bodies, and all kinds of crazy stuff, lawsuits and appeals as recently as 2013. So this thing has fast forward all the way through history down to 2013. And of course, there was a movie called Wormwood about the entire thing. Now, for those that don't know, the CIA handbooks state that the government had a security process to identify and execute domestic dissidents that were perceived to pose a risk. And the forensic evidence of death is suggestive of a method used by the CIA found in the first manual of assassinating. The most efficient accident in simple assassinating is a fall from 75 feet or more onto a hard surface. This is right in their writings. So this is the way that they do it. And all of this is documented here in this Wikipedia article, which is complete with footnotes. So remember, never believe Wikipedia, but always go to this number here, which will take you to a copy of real articles that basically is just a footnote of what is being spoken here. Now, this was the story of Frank Olson. Now we're going to fast forward to 1979 in another bizarre story about a person, once again, in Manhattan that fell to their mysterious death. And that person is Donnie Hathaway. Now, many people remember Donnie Hathaway. He wrote the song The Ghetto. He was very popular in the 1970s. Someday We'll Be Free. So a lot of these songs were very popular. He worked with Roberta Flack and all these other things. So this is Donnie Hathaway. Now, what happened to Donnie Hathaway? Well, this was another mysterious death. This time, it was on the 15th floor of the Essex House Hotel on January 13th, 1979. So we had the 10th floor with Olson, and now we have the 15th floor with Donnie Hathaway. And again, in Manhattan, with this soul artist, Donnie Hathaway. Now, the story went that he jumped just a few hours after he began behaving irrationally. The witnesses say he was paranoid and delusional. They were trying to record a song, and then they say that Hathaway started talking about white people and that they were trying to kill him, and had connected his brain to a machine for the purpose of stealing his music and his sound. Does this all sound familiar? The G Whiz, the Jive G. I mean, this is crazy, you guys. Now, I started, at this point of the rabbit hole, I started to plot all of these instances on Google Earth. First Olson and then Hathaway. And as you can see here, this is Olson's jump here. Let's click on it, see if we could zoom it up here. This was Olson's jump. And then we go to Hathaway's jump, and as you can see, it's on virtually the same street. 7th Avenue in Manhattan. Yet they're separated by 20-something years. Now, let's look at our next victim and see if we can find any clues about what this is all about. And I'll give you my thoughts on this at the end of the show today. Our next victim, Stephanie Adams. She was a model, so we're going to be talking about two models today. This is Stephanie here, Stephanie Adams. She was a model and a playmate, and she basically jumped out of a window with her child, Vincent. Now, this time it was on May 18th, 2018. And again, this was from the 15th floor of the Gotham Hotel. Now, supposedly she was in the middle of a custody dispute, but this is really weird. 15th floor, same floor as this other guy, this Hathaway guy, the soul artist. What is this about? Is this some kind of signature or something? Now, what was the story behind Stephanie Adams? Well, there's not much else to say other than they're saying that it was due to some custody dispute and she didn't want to give up her child. Oh, no, this was a 25th story balcony. Sorry, not 15th. It was the 25th floor. So what we have here is multiples of 5, don't we? 10, 15, and 25. This is really weird. Now, the last jump we're going to look at is, of course, Miss USA, Cheslie Kryst. Now, many of you had realized that Cheslie Kryst almost sounds a lot like Jesus Christ, doesn't it? And on January 30th, just a few days ago, she jumped from the 9th floor of the Orion Hotel. Now, she supposedly left a note, and they're saying that she did it to herself. But I want to go back into Google Earth and look at the proximity of these 4 jumps in proximity to one another. Now, these are just the 4 that I found. Actually, a couple of you had recommended that I look at these. I think I found 1 or 2 extra. But here are the jumps here. You've got Olson and Hathaway on 7th Avenue. Then you've got Kryst and Stephanie Adams very, very close to one another. We're talking 6 to 8 blocks away. Actually, 4 blocks away. So, what is going on with all this? Well, as you can see, here we have right in the middle of all of that, in the middle of all these jumps, we have something very strange, don't we? We have the New Yorker, the Hotel Edison, which was all about frequencies and signals. Now, process that for a second. What could frequencies and signals have to do with people falling or jumping out of buildings? Well, we know that the MK Ultra program had a lot to do with frequencies and signals, don't we? Now, there's a little bit more to this before we begin to start to wind down the show here. I'm going to close Google Earth just because it requires a lot of power on the computer and I don't want this to buffer. But let me go back here in the chat with you guys and just go over some of the numbers inside of Cheslie Kryst's life. Now, there's some strange synchronicities with the numbers in her life. Now, I'm not into beauty pageants, and I believe it's all about vanity, but we need to examine this phenomenon that's happening here. let's go into and look at her life and what was going on in Cheslie Kryst's life. Now, because of VidCo 19, she was the longest reigning Miss USA. Guess how long she was reigning Miss USA? 557 days. Which ended on 11/9. Let me scroll down here and show you where it says this here. This is shocking. 557 days, which ended on 11/9. Now, why is this so shocking? Well, here are these numbers again. 57 and 19. In fact, if you look at the prime factorization, or just the regular factorization of the number 57, the only factors in it are 3 and 19. So in the prime factorization of the number 57, you have the number 19. 19 times 3 is 57, the only factors of the number. Now, that's encoded in her reign as Miss USA, 557 days, which ended on 19, or 11/9. Now, it gets even stranger because she was the oldest woman to hold the title of Miss USA. So it made her different. Now, the questions that we need to ask here is, what is the dark spirit behind these falls? Were they intentional? Did something climb inside the head of these people and tell them to fall? Are these falls metaphors for the fall of man and the fallen angels, fallen stars? Now, I laid out the evidence, of course, as you just saw, to these mysterious circumstances and the possible link between Gottlieb and his possible grandfather who started the MK Ultra program. We laid out the evidence of, all the events surrounding these falls and the dark origins of when they may have began. So at this point, it's up to you to decide. But tomorrow, we will be digging deeper into the word, and we're going to rediscover another fallen star, Nebuchadnezzar, who went from a great tree that touched heaven. He was reduced to a flightless eagle. And so we're going to be talking about the obscure dream that he had, that Daniel decrypted for the king. This dream about this tree that was felled all the way to the stump and then bound in iron and copper. Now, there's a precedent for this because other great men of the Bible have been compared to trees in, several other times. We all know the story of Ezekiel 31, in which a pharaoh is also compared to a giant tree that was felled. The tree had limbs that were so vast that they spread across the entire world, and their limbs cast a shadow over the entire world. Exactly how Nebuchadnezzar's tree was described. And we'll read that tomorrow. So the question is, what were these trees? And I believe that they signify the invisible connection to heaven. In other words, they're basically the pronounced and exaggerated tree-shaped magnetic fields of these powerful men. And they pressed against heaven, and they were trying to usurp the power from the Most High. And so that's when God had to lower them. And so I believe that the symbolism of the tree dream was a throwback by God of his great trees of the garden, and that he was the one who made these worlds and people's power, their sphere of power. He limited their sphere of power. So I can't wait to break this down tomorrow. I always love getting back into the word, and that's what we'll be doing tomorrow as we take another look at the book of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Let's go back into the chat here and see what you guys are up to and what your thoughts are on all of this. All right. Welcome to the channel, everybody. if people are trees, then fruit is children. That is correct. And the Bible actually describes children as fruit. But the enemy mocks that. The enemy mocks that. But, being fruitful, that means having children. The Bible says the fruit of the womb. So yes, there's so much more to the Bible. The Bible is a living, breathing document. There are secrets hidden in the Bible that were meant to be uncovered here in the last days. And that's what we're doing right now. Digging deeper into the deeper meanings. Isn't it interesting that Nebuchadnezzar got turned into an eagle, basically? The Bible says he had talons and feathers. A flightless eagle. It's so clear to me, it's not even funny. That he was basically an eagle who lives in a tree that got thrown to the ground. Why are we just now discovering this? Why is this just now? Well, we know why. The Bible says knowledge will increase in the last days. But where was the church? Why are we still getting the third grade version of that dream that Daniel decoded over and over again in the church, and no new knowledge is being discovered? So we'll get into that more tomorrow. I don't want to give the whole show away because we'd be on here another hour talking about that. But that's what God revealed to me when I took another look at this. Yes, like a turkey, a flightless bird, eating grass. And guess what? These birds that can't fly, this is what they do. They pretty much eat grass. They're mostly vegetarian, except for chickens. I know they like to eat protein. But like a turkey, for instance. So, yes, Nebuchadnezzar, when I say great man, I'm not talking about a good man. He was used by God. We'll get into all that tomorrow. He was called a servant of God, but not for the reasons you think he was called. God had to lower him. God used him as a tool. And I'll explain all that tomorrow. Because his own people, Judah, was going against God. And so God had to show them a lesson. So that's what he used Nebuchadnezzar for. Yes, turkeys can fly short distances. Yes, they can. All right. I'm just reading through some of your comments here. Satan planted the terror seeds. And I would take it a step further and say that the tares are so closely intertwined into our genetic makeup that they can't be pulled until the end of time. And maybe this is why God said you can't pull up the tares yet, because you'll pull up the wheat with it. It suggests almost that the two are one. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but that we've been down. Bible, Chuck says the Bible is 66 books. Well, it's actually not. It's actually more like 77 or 88. Many of them were removed. The complete Bible would probably be like the Ethiopian Bible. And the Ethiopian Bible actually predates when they started removing books from the Bible during the Council of Nicaea in like the 500s AD. The Ethiopian Bible predates that. And in fact, Jesus quoted many scriptures from the book of Enoch, which was one of the books that was removed. So Jesus was probably referring to the Ethiopian Bible, which included all of the books. So, all right. Yeah, the Ethiopian Bible had 88 books. Thanks, Victoria. All right. Now, why would they start removing these other books from the Bible? Well, because these books that were removed tell the rest of the story. They basically reveal who is in control and power, who made the knives and all the weapons and all of that. It all came from the fallen angels. And they're the ones that are in control. So by removing those books, what they were able to do is to convince man that we are supposed to be in subjection to these wicked governments, which is simply not the case. So you have to see all of the rest of the story from the other books to understand the full thing. As a Christian, you don't want to be agreeing with governments. So I appreciate you guys too. Thanks, Jen. They knew too much, or ritual, says Thomas, about the people that fell out of the windows. I agree. Yes, 501c3 equals 66. Thanks. Now, the 501c3 church was basically planned obsolescence. So they created it, and now they're going to bring it down. They're going to destroy it. And as we saw yesterday, they're going to convert a lot of that to the metaverse. So you can go to church online in the metaverse and get baptized online, which is the false version of the truth. And so it was all created by design. God never intended for us to go into buildings to worship him. Because when Jesus came, he was a carpenter who never built a church. There was a reason why he was born a carpenter, to demonstrate that we don't need to go into a building to worship the Most High. But yet you see that one of the requirements of the 501c3 is a place of worship, an actual building. It's one of the requirements. So that's in direct opposition to the example that Jesus set for us. Jesus gathered in fields and in nature. That's where people gathered together. Not in a building. He went to temples to pull people out of them and to, talk to the Pharisees and try to talk some sense into them and rebuke them. That's the only reason why he went there. But if he really felt like we were supposed to worship in buildings, he would have built a church, right? As a carpenter. That's the way my mind thinks anyway. That's what my common sense brain tells me. Yeah, we are the temple. The body is the temple. Exactly. And when we're gathered together, there's your church. That's why it says that. Because we build something. If you think about it, I mean, I don't want to get into the symbols too much, but what does it say? We're one or two or more gathered together. So the minimum would be 3, right? Well, that forms a little building, like a little triangle, which would be the true triangle, right? Not the false one, not the Illuminati triangle. So if you really dig into these things and think about them, as the knowledge increases in the last days, you get a much fuller understanding of the Bible. The Bible now becomes very, very interesting and intriguing. How it came all the way down to us from thousands of years ago and is actually like plugging in to our current reality. I mean, I can't get enough of it when I get into some of these studies that we do. And as I was reading Nebuchadnezzar in his dream, I could see it like as plain as day. The iron and copper, the 2 bloodlines that Nebuchadnezzar presided over. And then it being cut off from heaven, which is like the portal. The trees are portals. So God's grace on Nebuchadnezzar was severed for 7 years. I mean, this is just fascinating. Amazing stuff. So anyway, yes, Isaiah talks about trees as well being cut down. We'll cover all that tomorrow. I love you guys. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. My son, he's gone on this cake donut kick. So we're going to head over to get some cake donuts, and I got to do a little grocery shopping for him. And then I'll be into preparing for tomorrow's show. I love all of you guys, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Please share this video. Take care and be safe.